Hello and welcome to the 39th episode of Tailoring in Conversation. My name is Reza, and in this series I'll be talking to tailors, business owners, cloth merchants, and other industry participants from all around the globe to gain a better insight into their worlds. My guest for today is Thomas von Nordheim. Thomas is a master tailor, couturier, and costume maker based in Kent, England. Some of you may know him from his Couture Masterclasses on Teachable or his work for the film Phantom Thread featuring Daniel Day-Lewis. In our conversation today, we're going to be talking about Thomas's background, couture, film productions, tailoring education, and much more. So let's get started. Thomas, you just mentioned that you are in your studio now, and your studio is in Kent, is that correct?
Yes, in Folkestone.
So is this the place where you see your clients work with all the different materials that you're working with, record your educational videos?
Yes, it's basically a place where I carry out my actual craft. I have some local clients, but the majority of my clients is still London-based. So I'm a member of a club in London where I see clients in central London, and it's very easy for me to get to. It's under an hour. It's fast train. Some clients, depending on what I'm working on, I'm working a lot on film costumes lately, and sometimes the designers come here, and we all, have a meeting. And because I'm contributing towards the design, often I have a big stock of fabrics and trimmings, which sometimes get incorporated in the designs. And I have a very big collection of actual garments here, dresses, and my own archive, so to say, plus historical garments. So it's a bit of a hub for making. I call it my laboratory.
Yeah, well, that's a good name to call it. Yeah.
Yes.
So do you work by yourself there, or do you have a team of people?
No, I basically work by myself. It depends how busy I am. I do have some people that I can draw upon. Some of them are specialized in things, so they'll be helping me. But generally, I do things myself. So I'm a one-man band.
Yes,
which has advantages and disadvantages, of course. I've never thought about employing someone or having an apprentice, because there's periods when you are just not busy, and it's then difficult to keep someone, doing something. So it's always been a kind of funny situation, but and obviously good people. If you need someone, then they might have another job, because it can sometimes, especially when it's costumes, the schedules are sometimes very tight. And, but I've always managed, so.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I do agree with you that it's very difficult to not only find the right apprentice, but also accommodate for them in all different ways, whether it's going to be their travel, their pay, their monthly salary, their skills that they're going to learn. It's very difficult. I definitely sympathize with that. So, Thomas, I am familiar with your work, but for those who are going to be watching this and who are listening, who aren't familiar with your work, could you give like a brief background of where you come from, how you got started, and how you kind of like transitioned into what you're doing now?
Okay, so I am German born. I grew up in Düsseldorf, and I started my career by doing a traditional apprenticeship in ladies tailoring.
And why ladies tailoring?
Well, so we're talking here late 80s, and it hasn't. I mean, if anything, I think it's gone worse. Even getting an apprenticeship. Düsseldorf is quite a big and wealthy city, so there was quite a lot of couture houses and men's tailors too, which could have supplied me with an apprenticeship, gave me the opportunity to learn there, but it was very, very difficult to get a place because there was basically so much competition. So my grandmother knew one of the big designers who was famous in the 50s and 60s. So he was already elderly by then, but he had a big atelier still. And so she tried to get me in there, but it was not possible. And I then had an old school friend whose mother knew someone who was the secretary of an architect whose wife had this couture salon.
Right.
We're talking a few corners here. And so she knew what my ambitions were, and she organized for me to have an interview. This is how I finally
and
got
how
it.
old were you then?
21.
21. Okay.
Yeah. So I had done my art school. I had done my A levels, and had I done my community service? I can't remember. Anyway, so this then happened, and it was for 3 years. It was quite tough, I must say.
In what ways?
Well, the woman to start with was a tough cookie. Yeah, she had herself trained. She had worked for a while with Dior in Paris, from the stories that I heard, and so the quality of craftsmanship was very, very high and very, very old-fashioned. I mean, we're talking doing things like they were done in the 1950s, and this was already like late 80s. So our atelier was famous for its craftsmanship in terms of being handmade. So it was quite a large establishment. There was a boutique on the ground floor which was selling luxury ready-to-wear, like Cheruti and Scherer, and she for a while also had a Dior boutique licensed to her in Düsseldorf. And on the first floor we had a big salon and the workrooms. We had 3 departments. There was the tailoring department, which had the cutter master tailor, and 5 tailors and about 5 apprentices we must have been. And then there were 2 dressmaking departments, which were, again, they had their head of department, which is called the Directrice in Germany, going by the French. And so they had about 10 journeymen, as we call them. So very skilled dressmakers, some of which had been working there for 30 years. And
why were they called journeymen?
Journeyman is what you become after your apprenticeship. So you do your apprenticeship for 3 years, and then you are technically a journeyman. And you can carry on doing this for the rest of your life. Or if you are ambitious, you can do a master. You become a master tailor, but it takes 3 or 4 years to go through this process. So you have to go back to school, and then there's an examination run by it's all run by the Tailors Guild in Germany. It's very regimental in that sort of sense. It's all very tightly controlled. I think it's relaxed in the meantime, but the guild is still quite strong.
So why is it called a journeyman?
I have no idea. I mean, I looked it up, what it means in English, and that's what it tells you.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it's from journey as in your professional journey.
But it's not that they are traveling, like traveling craftsmen or something.
No.
Okay.
No. That's only the carpenters doing that.
I see. Okay. So Thomas, you are sketching out some sort of an image for us in regards to how you started, where you went, and how the structure roughly was. I know very little about the German tailoring industry in general. I do know that there a lot of books and systems have been published in Germany
Yes.
throughout the years, but I haven't experienced the German tailoring industry or the couture industry. How would you describe that at the time that you were there in terms of the educational factors? What sort of
Yeah.
clientele did you have? And
Hmm.
what was people's attitude towards tailoring? I mean, you mentioned a guild, and that guild was very strict. Could you give some more information about how that was?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I can only talk from what it was like then, because I'm not really in up to date with what it's like now. I have heard from some people that certain things have relaxed. So basically, any handcraft profession is regulated by a guild. So there's the Guild of Hairdressers. If you want to become a hairdresser, you have to go through a training. You have to go and work in a hair salon, and you have to go to vocational school, and it's the same thing as 3 years. And then you have to do your examination at the end. So you need to know, I don't know, how to dye a certain hair color, how to cut hair a certain way. So all these sort of things. So I was quite surprised to hear when I came to England that here it's very easy. So you can open your hairdresser, like you just open a shop basically, and you don't have to have any qualification whatsoever. And so this is completely different. And I think it has historical background, of course, it must have, to protect the craft itself, but also to protect customers from having any kind of rogue craftspeople selling you services or products that are not up to scratch. I would imagine. Also, the system of having to choose what sort of specific subject you want to do. So let's say it's the same for other crafts too. I know an equivalent in shoemaking. So there's different processes that you never learn the whole thing. This is to keep the people separate, so they could then not go and open their own business. I think that's the historical context to this. And so, of course, when you do a tailoring apprenticeship, yes, you do learn everything from A to Z. But during the 3 years of my apprenticeship, I had never made a whole jacket from start to finish.
And that's because of that structure of keeping you kind of like
well, it was time constraints, and also how the apprentices were being used. The term used is actually quite fitting.
So how were you used, let's say?
So we started at 8 in the morning, and the first hour of the day was spent tidying and cleaning, basically. So we were basically responsible for the running of the atelier, anything that needed doing. And then the head tailor, he would tell you or ask you to go and bring his lottery ticket to the shop, that sort of thing. And I heard, I mean, it never happened to me, but I heard from other apprentices at vocational school, they had to iron the underwear of their designer's husband. So that's the sort of things that apprentices were.
Oh my God!
I mean, that's probably quite an extreme. But you know what I mean. It's a sort of
yes.
Yeah. So basically anything, or it's like Thomas, can you go across the street and get a chicken leg for a client's dog, or cigarettes or something like that? So basically, you weren't just sitting there and learning
Yeah,
day
well,
long.
let me tell you something in line with what you said. I was doing my apprenticeship, and we had a work experience person that kind of like, doing the things that you're describing. And one day we had a client who walked in with a small pug, and my boss just said, is I'll conceal the name of the boy, but he was like, "Hey, could you just entertain the dog, please?" And he was just
Yeah,
playing with the dog.
it sounds a bit like that. Yes. So
Okay.
my first, I remember my first day when I came to work. Mrs. Lang, that was her name. She arrived. She had an Alfa Romeo, and it was summer. I started in early September, and it was a coupe, so it was open. She had three silk terriers, which were called chiffon, georgette, and satin. I mean, you couldn't make it up. But they were
Yeah.
sitting next to her in the car, and she parked the car in front of the shop, and I was given the keys and said, "Can you go and park this for me in the underground parking?" And I said, I had a driving license, but I very politely declined and said I wouldn't like to take the risk and the responsibility for the car. And I was never asked again. So
Right.
I there was often some friction because I was brought up to be quite independent and to also question things. And I didn't like the kind of system of the hierarchy. So I sometimes answered back, and so it didn't do me many favors. But from a technical perspective, I mean, obviously at the time I was very young. I didn't appreciate what I was learning because I had no comparison. But retrospectively, it's the best thing that I've ever done. And so there was another apprentice who also wasn't very happy, and we had to basically support each other during the 3 years. After a year, it was like, "Oh, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm going to leave." And then, "Oh, we've already done a year, and it's only another 2 years." And then, after a year and a half, now we've done half, and we can't leave now. So it was really like that. But it was very interesting. You asked about the clientele. So they were so it wasn't young, fashionable ladies. It was more mature, not old, but mature, I would say. And they had their classic, because I was in the tailoring department. I made classic skirt suits, occasionally trousers. So in the first year of my apprenticeship, one of my jobs was to baste up things for fitting. So tailor tacking everything. And I remember we had one client, she must have been, I don't know, hip size 50 or something. So it was big. And she used to wear pleated skirts. So the pleats were 1 inch deep. So you can imagine joining panels, and she usually had small checks. You can imagine how, I mean, for a first fitting, we didn't press or sew anything. Everything was basted together, and everything had to be lined up and the checks matching. And it took me 2 days just to prepare a skirt for fitting. But
Yeah.
and then so then we would do things like, it was always done on clients' garments, but like I said earlier, it was never from start to finish. So I would get a collar, and I had to pad stitch a collar, or I was given a pair of sleeves, and then I had to make the sleeves or buttonholes on this or that, or lining, something like that. So it was never a whole thing. However, I had already started sewing before I did my apprenticeship. So obviously I didn't really know. It was basically like I thought it was done. And I asked a few Yes, I remember now. I had done my community service instead of army before I did my apprenticeship, because there was an old lady in the club I was working. She was in her 80s and she was a tailoress, and she was still sewing things for her granddaughter, and she showed me a few sort of things. So I thought I knew a lot already. So when I came to do my apprenticeship, I would bring them up. And so, in example, how do you get the distance correct between the button and the jacket? You have this little stem. So she told me to put a matchstick between them and then make the little stem.
Yeah.
So and then when I was taught how to sew on a button at work, I brought this up and I said, no, we don't do this here. This is like, completely unprofessional. So, it was, they had their own ways of doing things, and this is how it was done. And it was, when someone started working there, they would say, well, forget everything you've learned so far. We're doing things differently here.
Yes. Well, that's a very tricky situation, because I always think about this when thinking about my own apprenticeship, but also doing the Newham course that I did before I joined the tailors that I joined. It was very funny, because you learn one way of doing something, and your teacher is convinced that is the way. And then you go to the tailoring house and they are convinced that what you've learned is wrong and that their way is correct.
Yeah. So this is what I've always been telling my students. So I've been teaching at London College of Fashion for 17 years, a couture tailoring class.
17.
Yes.
That's a very long time. Wow.
Yes. This has come to an end now for one reason or another. I won't elaborate on it. But so this was only twice a year, and it wasn't full-time students or degree students. It was short courses, so anybody could join. So in the beginning, it was more domestic market. It was sometimes ladies who had been sewing when they were younger, and then they had a career and they wanted to get back to doing tailoring. Or sometimes it was young people who wanted to study fashion and just wanted to learn more about it. It was also I had people who were sent by their employers, so they could have been designers or buyers. I had a whole lot from COS. I think 3 of them, they were sent to do my course, just for them to get a better understanding about what it's about. Not that they would necessarily use what they've learned. It was just for them to know what it's all about. So I have always taught my students, this is what I tell you, this is how I do things, but this is not the gospel truths. Yes, this is just one way of doing it. And what I think is very, very important is, which I've done throughout my teaching, is to explain why you are doing things. Because then the person understands it and can, I think it's better for them to remember. If you know why you're doing something, then it will become natural. You don't then have to think about it anymore. So instead of telling someone, you do this and then this and then this, this is how it's done. It goes in here and it comes out there. And but if they know why they're doing certain things, that's always I found in also very important for someone who is learning to know, and also really making them understand there's not just one right and one wrong way. There's just different ways. When you are more experienced, you will know, you learn how you apply certain techniques to a certain project. So I have worked for many different places after my apprenticeship, and they all did things differently. And so I've always learned something new. So I picked then what I wanted to, remember and could apply it to a future project.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I think it's important for students to understand that when they are learning something, it's not the first and the last thing that they are ever going to learn. They have to have the ability to take that and apply it multiple
And
places.
you never stop learning. I mean, I don't know everything. That's basically, I can't make a Milanese buttonhole. I've never done it. You know?
Well, you haven't done it, you say, but if you would do it, then you would be able to know how to do it.
Yes, probably. But like I said, it's you have to explore things.
Mm-hmm.
It's so one example where I trained, so I did ladies tailoring, which is different from gents hard tailoring if you want. However, I was trained, the head cutter and master tailor, he was a men's tailor that was his background. So he was a men's tailor in the 50s and 60s, and he had moved on to ladies tailoring for, I don't know what the reason was, but so what we did technically was a mix between the two. So we would use hair canvas in every jacket, with pad stitching, and we had certain way of staying the edges. And I have since discovered that, yes, a lot of people do things very differently. So in the hems, we used silk organza, and we would also press the hems really sharp, which in ladies tailoring, traditional ladies tailoring is more soft tailoring. So some places I've worked in, they have used linen, duck canvas in the fronts, sometimes cut on the bias, and it gives you a different result every time. We have mounted whole jackets on organza, then added other layers or used cotton domet depending on what the fabric was. So this was not something that I had ever done where I trained. So when I came to London, I worked for one designer, and they made jackets completely differently. And so yes, it's interesting.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about couture, because you obviously did your apprenticeship in Germany, then you moved to London at some point, and you worked for a very steady couture house. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up there and how the whole trajectory was a little bit?
Okay, so I had finished my apprenticeship, and then instead of staying where I trained and becoming, a journeyman for another few years and basically working there, I decided my plan was to come to London. I had this plan a long time before. I knew London quite well. I used to come to London twice, 3 times a year for extended periods. And my plan was to study fashion at St. Martin's. So that was my plan. And so the year after my apprenticeship finished, I prepared a portfolio and applied to different colleges. So my first choice was St. Martin's, and then it was London College of Fashion and Wimbledon School of Art. So I had interviews at Wimbledon, and I decided against it. And London College of Fashion, I was told, was very technically orientated, and because I had already done my apprenticeship, I basically knew how to, make a garment. I again didn't want to do this, and at St. Martin's, my portfolio got lost. It did turn up again, but it's a long story. But so this it didn't happen basically. So this was the summer of 93, I think, 93 or 94.
93.
93.
I was 1 year old.
Oh my God, this makes me feel very old. I was in touch with a designer in London who was German. He was from Düsseldorf, and he had been working with an outworker at the atelier where I was an apprentice. So she had made the contact, and I did see this person when I came to London. It was two guys basically, and they were. He had been working for a designer called Victor Edelstein. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him. He was quite famous at the time. He made lots of dresses and garments for the Princess of Wales. He was one of the clients. So he had been working there, and then he went by himself with a business partner. And they were based in a flat in Pimlico, in the basement of a flat. And I went there to see them a few times when I was in London. And then when they realized I had finished my apprenticeship, their business was expanding. They were getting more clients. They asked me if I wanted to work for them. So I had nothing lined up, and they were just going into collection time. So they were very, very busy, and I had to make a decision within a couple of weeks. He then organized for me to be able to stay with a friend in South London. So this part was already sorted out, and so I basically said yes, sure. So this is how I came to London. I kept my flat in Düsseldorf for another 2 or 3 years. So I was going back and forth. At times I also worked for another designer in Düsseldorf. But this went on for, I think, about 3 years. Then I was working freelance in London for a few couturiers. There was someone called Donald Campbell. He had 2 shops, one in Chelsea, one in Knightsbridge. And I did I worked from my house then. And it was, they would give me the patterns and I would make something.
I see.
It was luxury ready to wear, basically. There was no fittings. And then 96, I think it was 96. I heard that La Chasse was looking for a tailor. And I had heard of La Chasse because it was a very historical couture house in London. So Hardy Amies had worked there before the war. They had few other famous designers in the 1950s. So I went there and had an interview. They were originally based in I think they were founded in the late 20s. And the couture trade was all based in Mayfair, around Berkeley Square. That was the sort of Bond Street. That's where all the court dressmakers were, and ladies tailors. So La Chasse was in Farm Street in an old coach house, which is still there. And they had the whole house. It was really, really big. And they were specialized in tweeds, making hence the name La Chasse. There's French for hunt. So it was basically sports couture. So very upmarket, sporty clothing in British fabrics. And so they were famous for that. And Hardy Amies, I can't remember when he joined, but in the 30s, one of the things he did, he made tweed an acceptable fabric to wear, like all day, and even in London. It was before tweed was only worn in the country.
Yeah.
So this is one of their. It's not a well-known fashion house, and historically it's not very important. But people who know, they come across the name. And so Hardy Amies, of course, opened by himself in the late 40s, and he got to work for the Queen, which is something La Chasse always wanted but never did. So when I started working for them, the same designer who had started there in 1949. He had become the sole owner in the 1970s. He was in his 80s then. So the house had to move in the 80s because the lease of the house in Farm Street was not renewed. So they moved to a shop in South Kensington, where they were until they closed I think it was 2004. And of course, the trade had declined, and they were becoming smaller and smaller. Clients were getting older and older and gradually died off. And this is what happened to a lot of businesses, you know. So some companies, so like Hardy Amies, they of course tried to reinvent the house with Jacques Azaguri, I think it was, who was brought in. And there was someone else, and I can't recall his name, but they tried to make it all modern and really fresh. So we had some clients like Lady Spencer, who had been going to Hardy Amies always. And she was appalled by having 18-year-old models all of a sudden, modeling the clothes and the clothes, and it was just not what they wanted. So some clients came to La Chasse. So the clients we had, they were all very old, 70s, 80s, 90s. And they had been going there since they were young. They had the same. It's very tricky to date a La Chasse suit because they basically did the same thing all the way along. You can't say, is it 1952? Is it 1967? Or is it from the 80s? It was that sort of thing. And interesting cuts and use of color and pattern. This is something that I picked. So I basically learned a lot about cutting there, which previously I was sort of self-trained in. I never did a formal training in pattern cutting. You mentioned the German cutting systems earlier, like Müller and Son, which are well known, worldwide. But I have never done that, and so I learned from the tailor we had. He was in his late 70s. He was the head tailor at La Chasse. The workroom was quite small. We had 4 tailors then, and we would get designs from the head, and then had to prepare the cut and prepare the jackets for the fittings. So I was basically working on just jackets and coats. The skirts were made in the dressmaking department.
I see.
So yes, I learned a lot there. Again, the way they worked were quite different from what I had trained. And there was an old tailoress there. She had been working there for like 40 years. And she said, "Oh, in Mr. Owen's days, things were much better. And, we used to do this and this and that." And
I actually, I want to ask you something. I was talking to another tailor, and I said, if you could make a change to the tailoring industry, what would that be? And he said, go back 100 years. Now, I hear that a lot. A lot of people like the older ways of doing things. When I was doing my apprenticeship, my boss would tell me all the time, back in the days, the Italians were doing this, the Greek were doing that. Why do you think that there is so much demand and desire for the old ways of doing things? Whereas logically, if you think about it, we are moving towards the future and we are improving things all the time.
Yeah.
Why do craft people still want to go back to the old golden days?
Okay. I have thought about this a lot because I do things the old-fashioned way. I do a lot of hand finishings that other people don't do. I mean, yes, very good old traditional tailors do it, but a lot of people don't. The designer I mentioned when I first came to London, he hated anything that looked hand finished or handmade. He had a total aversion, and he. So, for example, when we made suits, the suits were usually silk and evening-y sort of thing. So, to catch down the seam allowance on the inside of the facing, you know, when you do a hand prick stitch,
yeah,
so we were not allowed to do that. We had to do a top stitch by machine, which Couture is a no go. Yeah, so there's no machine stitch unless it's a decorative top stitching. You're not supposed to see any machine stitching on the outside. And you know, just he had his own ways of how he wanted things finished. He wanted it to look like really luxury, ready to wear is finished. So there was obviously in history there was a gradual change as things progressed. So sewing machine came out in the 1850s, but 100 years later, people were still doing a lot of hand finishings. Okay, the lining jackets and buttonholes. So by the 50s, you already had machines for that sort of thing as well. So the question is, yes, why do you keep on doing this when now, you know, there's machines that make you a jetted pocket, you know, it's all automized and automated. I mean, my theory is, or my feeling is that something that is handmade has an intrinsic value to it, which you cannot compare with something that is machine made. It might not be as perfect, but that's the hallmark of something that is hand finished.
How would you describe the intrinsic value? If you had to describe the intrinsic value, what would you say that is?
It has something of the person that makes it goes into the garment. That's the feeling I have. Yeah, I can't. It's difficult to describe, but it's yeah, it's almost like there's this connection. Yes, and the value. So I think nowadays so just another example. So nowadays food, you have this ecologically grown vegetable, or you know, it's I don't know, it's a rare species of apples that you don't get anymore, and it's a rare breed of beef and that sort of thing. And it's sort of the label of special is put to things, and in recent years this has become applied to things like, I know, couture chocolates. I mean, which is a stupid expression, you know. But it basically defines something that this is just how things were naturally. Yes, things used to be made by hand. Bread used to be baked and made by hand. It was always artisan bread, but now it's a brand that makes things something special, because mm, mass production has taken over.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the people think something that is handmade and goes back to how things used to be made is somehow more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree to a certain extent, because a lot of love and care goes into the making of something.
Mm-hmm. So I get the feeling that when we are thinking about the tension between automation and mass industries, let's say, and we then compare the handcraft to that, I guess that a lot of people feel that if automation takes over completely, it almost steals something from the human, which, if you bring it into philosophy, you can say it's as if we are selling our soul in return for convenience and efficiency. Now,
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm thinking also about the fact that so I had this discussion with my dad a lot. He's a painter, and sometimes when he's sketching something out, he uses a projector. When it's like a very big painting, for example, he
Yeah.
uses a projector, makes it easy for himself.
Yeah.
And I've always said to him, look, I don't mind the fact that you're doing this, but don't you think that if you would talk to some of the older masters, they would tell you off? They would be like, hey, man, you should do it by hand. And he said,
They did it as well.
exactly. So he
Yes.
said,
Yeah,
look,
they had this grid.
yeah. Exactly. So he told me, like, look, if there is a tool that can make your work easier without sacrificing the end result, you should use it. Because, yes, you can, make I don't know, make a house by clay and by hand completely. But if you can make a brick maker and turn your clay into brick, then you obviously can create a better house. So then my question is, if we have the old ways of doing things and we have the new ways of doing things, how is it that most tailors don't really try to separate the good stuff from the old ways and incorporate the good stuff from the new ways, so that it's not just, oh, we only machine the longer seams by machine and everything else we do by hand, but they can also say easily and comfortably, look, this machine makes better jetted pockets than we do by hand. So we might as well use this and spend our time on, for example, doing the shoulders and the sleeves by hand instead of just the edge stitching or the buttonholes. Why do you think we haven't still got that selection of the best from both worlds?
I mean, I think as it is, the two exist alongside. Yes. So you have big factories who produce, excellent quality jackets, for example, using the newest technology. They have shapes that press the jackets on into shape, and there's no more, iron working to do because it's all done mechanically. And yes. I mean, to me, as a maker, I, of course, so I'm talking really selfishly now. So
Sure.
Of course, I wouldn't like to work in a factory operating a machine that does something.
Yes.
And also mass production. I enjoy treating each individual project like something that you go through step by step, where things also can change, of course, with the client designs. And so if it's a bespoke thing, then it's something very different. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the design. I enjoy the working out the pattern. I enjoy the making, the finishing, and it makes me happy when the client is happy. This is all. You don't have this. For example, when you when you have a machine, completely machine made garment. Now, not everybody can do what I do. You know, that's just the way it is. You know, I feel quite, I wouldn't say privileged, but like it's a bit of a luxury for me to be able to do what I do.
Yes.
Given sort of, I can even sometimes say, no, I don't want to do this. So for example, I do men's suits. I do have, you know, male clients. But I don't really enjoy making gray or navy blue suits. I can do it, but it's not really, there's other people who enjoy doing it probably.
Yes. Would you say that perhaps craft is for the artisan first and then for the client? Because I think the joy element, what you bring up, is very important.
Yes.
You know what
Yes. Well, there's the word art in artisan. And I think it's like, you know, it's like a painter who enjoys painting, and then someone buying it is not the whole point of painting. It is an added bonus if someone does buy it, but the process is not aimed at necessarily. So, I mean, for me, I you know, I have to work. I can't retire just yet. So it's sort of it's not an issue because I enjoy what I'm doing. You know, and so yeah, I do. The feedback I get from clients is they really feel they enjoy being involved in the process, in the creative process, and seeing how something is done step by step. So it's the client as well who benefits from it, as opposed to going into a shop and buying something off the rack.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have to ask you about this because it would be weird to interview you and not ask about this. You were involved in the Phantom Thread, and
Yes.
Daniel Day-Lewis is absolutely is my favorite actor all time. This is just it's a shame that he didn't make more films and he retired, quickly. But how was that? How was that project? How were you approached? How did you manage to kind of like schedule everything? What was your involvement? I really would like to know how that went.
Okay. It was okay. So Daniel Day-Lewis was one of my favorite actors too, ever since seeing My Beautiful Laundrette. So that you were not alive then, I don't think. But so yes, he made very few films, but he's a fantastic actor, and
absolutely, yeah.
I always liked him. So okay, so this whole project came about by me getting a call by the costume supervisor asking if I was interested in making a suit for this film. And I said, of course, and I asked, can you tell me a little bit more about it? And I also, of course, wanted to know who had recommended me or to, yes. So it was basically a student of mine who had done a course with me at London College of Fashion, probably 8 years prior to Phantom Thread. Yes. So she thought about me. Oh, Thomas would be perfect person for this.
Yeah.
And so this how this came about. Now, I mentioned earlier I was at Cockpit Arts in Bloomsbury. And the studio for the costumes was basically based at the old St. Martin's building in Kingsway, so right at the top. So we're talking 2 minutes away from my studio. So I went over there like a week later or something, and I met the woman who had recommended me. I didn't know at this time she was also working on it. She was basically the head cutter for the ladies' dresses. Her background, she's French, and her background was also couture from her mother. So she was doing all those things. And then they were looking for someone who was going to make this 1950s suit, because you've seen the film, I'll take it.
Yes.
So to me, it was just up my street, because it was set in the 50s in a couture house, something which I had like experienced firsthand. Obviously not in the 50s, but in the 80s it was still like in the 50s, you know.
Yes.
It was something that was like really close to me, and so the designs we looked at as well. So I met then Mark Bridges, the designer behind it, and there was a lot of designs which was from the designers of the 50s. It was set in London, so there was lots of La Chasse as well. So we looked at these things, and as you might know, they're not allowed to just copy something. So there was, for example, a suit planned for the fashion show scene, which was more or less a design, Grace Kelly's wedding suit, something like that, in a beautiful lace. And they weren't allowed to do this design in the end, because it was too close to the original. I can't remember the whole story. So we had to kind of adopt the designs. And I came up with some suggestions and how we can do this. So then it was supposed to be just the one suit. This is often how it happens in costume jobs. And then the designers appreciate what you do. They realize they you have someone who can do this sort of thing. And then it became another suit and another one and another one. So I think I made 12 outfits altogether. Yes, I did all the suits for his sister in the film. I made Danny Day-Lewis's linen jacket, his lab coat,
the white one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was my one, and I made him a trench coat, which he sadly doesn't wear in the film.
That's a shame. So you made all of these by yourself, or did you have a team with you who made?
No, I had because it was so much. I had to get some help. Yes. So
What was the time limit?
I think it was over a period of 3 months.
Okay. And you have to do everything in 3 months.
Yes. Yeah, I think we started in January, February, and then it went on to like sort of May time. I think that's what it was. And so, yes, there's a scene with the fashion show, and that's when it became really frantic, you know. So, yes, I had people.
I've heard or read that he is kind of like pretty hands-on when he's making a film, as you know, and he really just goes into the acting for like 7 months or a full year. Did he? And I think I read that he also apprenticed someone to learn how to make a coat or something. Did you see him during that production being involved in the fittings or whatsoever?
When I think he had done some kind of tuition with someone, and he had made a dress for his wife, I believe.
Right.
Prior to the film or in preparation to the film. So he goes into his role, and he really takes things very seriously. He stays in character as well. So when we saw him on set, you know, it was "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," you know. I didn't. He was because my atelier was very close to where he sometimes came for the costumes, fittings, and things, they had actually planned to bring him over to my studio, but sadly it didn't, because they got held up. I think they went jewelry shopping in Hatton Garden for things, and so unfortunately, he never came to my studio. But I had to go to fittings in the Cotswolds, where he was filming the scenes of the country house, and he was very involved and very interested in the whole design process. So there was Mark Bridges, and then the costume supervisor. There was Reynolds Woodcock as the designer, and he would make suggestions as to colors, and he would say, "Oh, how about this and this?" So it was almost as if he was, there, risen from the grave from the 50s, and like doing this.
Strange, very interesting.
It was interesting. Yes,
definitely a special experience. Now, obviously, you said something a few minutes ago about couture chocolate.
Yes.
Now, you know about the world of couture, and you also know about the world of tailoring. If I would ask you, Thomas, what is the main difference between these two? When can someone call themselves a couturier? When can someone call themselves a tailor? What would you say?
I think the main difference, I would say, is couture is more for ladies. There's no men's couture, except I think Oswald Boateng has it. Is it bespoke couture, he calls this brand or something, which is really silly, this label. But yes, I think traditionally couture refers to ladies, not just tailoring, dressmaking too. So a couturier used to be someone. Couture apparently only exists since 1860s, House of Worth, when they started making individual garments, present them to potential clients, and then making it to specific designs. Whereas before then, well, from what I researched, is people used to go to tailors and supply them with the fabric and say, "Here, make me a coat or whatever." So and then it became more specialized. So you had houses in London and in Paris and Italy who were then specializing in different types of the trade. So like La Chasse was sporty clothing, sports couture. You also had people specialized in, let's say, evening dresses or equestrian. So it's a sort of transient. I mean, now a couturier can be a tailor, but a tailor is not necessarily a couturier, because couture refers more to dresses as well. You say it's a couture dress. So the houses in Paris, or those who are still there, they are couture houses, but they do offer tailoring in not in the strict sense of Savile Row tailoring. There's a difference between the couture tailoring in let's say Paris and hard tailoring for gents.
And would you say that the collections that a formal couture house has to let's say bring out, is that absolutely a requirement, and if you don't have the collections, you can't call yourself a couture house, or is that not something that
well, in France it is a protected you can't call yourself a haute couture house unless you fulfill certain requirements. So I think they have been relaxed a few years ago as to how many models you have to present in a single show. It used to be something like, I think, 80 or something per season. You have to present them to the press and the clients. There had to be certain how many people you were employing in your atelier, where you were based, that sort of thing. It all quite tricky. But it's the same with Savile Row. You know, you can be an excellent tailor but not be in Savile Row.
And still call yourself a Savile Row tailor.
Yes, actually, yes. Isn't it? I can't remember who it is, but yes, you're not in Savile Row, but you're a Savile Row tailor.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
So, yeah, I mean, it's.
Well, you know, the question is, are regulations good? Because you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that in Germany you had all the guilds; they were strict.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's good to have a regulatory entity or an institution that sets the standards and then makes sure that not everyone can just do whatever they want?
In a way, I think yes. But for example, so in Germany, it used to be that you could not open an establishment offering bespoke clothing unless you had been an apprentice, a journeyman, and then had done your master tailor examination run by the guild.
Okay.
This is how it used to be. People got round it by offering alterations. Okay. So they would open an alteration tailoring business, and then they would tell their clients, oh, and by the way, I can make you this and this. So it was sort of under-counter kind of thing. And I don't know how strictly it was policed, but I think you could get into trouble if they found out that you were offering this service. This, I think, is now more relaxed. I heard this a few years ago that you now can offer to make bespoke clothing without having gone through this process. I mean, a few years ago, I looked into there is something called the Guild of Master Craftsmen, British Guild of Master Craftsmen or something. I looked into it.
In London, you mean, or in Britain?
Yeah, in Britain, yes. And all you needed to do was to send them a link to your website so they could have a look at what you were doing, and then you had to pay a subscription.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you could be a master. Well, you could call yourself a master carpenter or something, or silversmith or something. But from what I understood was there were no experts who actually would look at your work in detail and would decide, yes, you are worthy becoming a member of our guild. And I thought, well, if anyone can join it, and there's no value, there's no benefit in it.
Yes.
So the client might see the logo, which you then allow to use on your, I don't know, stationery website, whatever. But I mean,
it doesn't have much meaning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, well, this is one of the dilemmas that I've been thinking about, and I'm actually speaking to someone on the podcast with them, is that SRBA, Savile Row Bespoke Association, is, I believe, still active, but I cannot understand how you can have Savile Row Bespoke Association still active and at the same time have so many tailors using the name Savile Row. Even like you say, alteration tailors would say things like, we have Savile Row quality. It's a very strange dynamic, but like you say, having just a logo there doesn't really make it official. So,
yes, yeah, anyone can call themselves a couturier or even master tailor. I don't think it's protected at all, not in this country anyway. So
okay. Let's cover the last topic, and then I'll do a speed round with you, which I'd like to do. So obviously, we are talking about standards. We're talking about anyone being able to set up a shop or whatsoever. But I think at the foundation of all of that is, of course, can a tailor deliver on what they promise? And to be able to do that, one needs a very good education.
Yeah.
So you are an educator. You have videos extensively on how to do all these different types of garments, these different types of techniques, styles. Plus, you have 17 years of teaching experience just at LCF. It was correct.
Yes, I was also doing a project at the Royal College. I was visiting Royal College of Speech and Drama in Cardiff. I went to a fashion school in India to do some faculty training, and I was supposed to go to China just before the pandemic hit. So obviously that never came about. It was going to 5 different branches in China, but there's no way I'm doing this now. So.
No, well, you wanted to go to the pandemic, but the pandemic came to you. So.
That's right. Yes. Yes. I mean, the educational side I also enjoyed, and the videos you mentioned. So 10 years ago, I published a book, Vintage Couture Tailoring, which there was nothing on the market then, which was in as much detail. So there's basically illustrations of every step of making a couture jacket the way I learned to do it. So it's still the sales have actually gone up now. I think they put a new cover on it last year that was reprinted. So that's it's good. It goes to show there is demand for people wanting slow tailoring as opposed to
Yeah.
I would guess the market is more hobby sewists who appreciate quality. I had also scheduled a 3-week education for 2020, which of course didn't happen. This was a workshop. This was 1 week going to London and Paris to archives of the V&A and museums and suppliers, that sort of thing. And then I thought, what can you do? You can't do this now. So people have been telling me, "Oh, Thomas, you must be doing some video things." And so it had been on my radar, but I mean the COVID thing has really then kicked me up the backside to get going on it, and that's so I did this last year, and then I have these 5 online masterclasses where shown. So that had very good feedback, and it's sort of between face-to-face teaching. As in, the real world and the book. It's kind of in between, but I think it's good for people who, I don't know, can't come to London or live somewhere or are elderly or I don't know. It is. I think it's something that suits some people.
Yes, definitely.
So my plan is to expand on it, have a few more subjects, and then I think education is a good education is as scarce as an apprenticeship. I mean, I don't know even if I know there's companies in Britain offering apprenticeships. I've heard of a few, and not only London. I can't comment on how good and thorough they are, but college, I'm not sure how So you went to Newham, you mentioned earlier, yes?
Yeah, I initially started at Newham. There was a very short course of what they called pre-apprenticeship. That's what they called it. It was just 18 weeks. And then after that, well, during that time, I went to Savile Row and I did my actual apprenticeship there on Savile Row.
Yeah. And did you find it beneficial? Did you learn a lot?
Well, yes, I think so. I think that I had a very good teacher at Newham who is not there anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
the things that he taught were universal. So, for example, when I was sewing one day, he walked past me and he said, "You have to pull the thread quicker." And so, doesn't matter where you're working, you can use that anywhere, you know? So it wasn't that he was very strict on this is how you make a pocket. He would tell us, if you go to Savile Row, if you go to a tailor, they would tell you what to do. But this is a method. But he just gave good advice. He was like an you could tell he has experience in training students up, and so he would try to give you as many universal things as possible. However, I do have to say that now, if I think about Newham and the things I hear about Newham and what they are teaching, it seems to me that if you don't have a good teacher, doesn't matter what they are teaching. If the teacher can't train the student to prepare for another place or another workshop or whatsoever, then it's almost useless because, you might as well learn from a book, let's say. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without the teacher with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I know some people who also went to Newham or have been to other like fashion colleges, and one of the things that I gathered was they are not prepared for real life out there.
Yes.
Life in the industry, and just made me laugh when he said to pull your thread. Yeah. I mean, where I trained, they asked you to keep records. I mean, not of the apprentices, but the cutter and the journeyman. They had to keep records of how long they would work on a certain garment, and there was in the guilds. I mean, for the examination, you had certain times to do certain things. So I remember one of them, and it was lining a jacket by hand.
Yeah,
it was 2 hours.
The whole thing.
Yes.
Wow, that's fast.
Including cutting out. So you had to cut out. Well, in ladies' jackets, you don't have pockets inside, so it's a bit quicker. And they machined the side seams, but the shoulders closed by hand, and of course facings and hem all done by hand, and the sleeves by hand. But it's 2 hours. It's not very long.
No, it isn't.
So when I did my examination, that was a bit of a shock because I kind of had arrived in the real world.
I can imagine. So Thomas, based on your experience, what do you think that our bespoke tailoring industry needs the most in terms of education? I mean, there are so many courses now, there are so many schools, there's so many books, there is everything. But if you had to choose something and you would say, look, out of all these things, this is the most important thing, what would you say that is?
I think it depends on what the person who is going to learn wants out of it. If it's someone who wants to work in the industry or plan to open their own business as an end goal, my first advice would be to not rush things. So learn to walk before you run. Because I had students doing a course with me at LCF for a week, and they said, well, and then in 6 months I'm going to open my own business.
Yes, you will.
Good luck. I mean, the difficulty I think also is, even if you are able to learn the technical things, so the tailoring process, you still have the problem of cutting, which is in effect a separate profession.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And the fitting, I mean, you can be a wonderful tailor, but if you can't fit, then the garment is not going to look good, is it?
Yeah.
So you have these different professions, and so of course you have in several rows you have pressers. Yeah, all they do is pressing, and it's a wonderful skill. But as if you want to do everything, you have to really. It will take a while. So I know of the Savile Row Academy. Yeah, so Morris Sedwell, isn't it?
Yes,
doing it?
yes.
Yeah. So obviously that's a very good thing. I don't know anyone who's done it, but I've visited it, and I spoke to some students, but I don't know what exactly you have at the end and what your prospects are to then get a place somewhere to work. I'm not sure. It also depends, of course, where you are. It's obviously the best is to work as you learn as you work somewhere.
True.
But I'm not sure where. Yeah, I'm not sure where the future goes for the craft itself. I mean, I hear, especially now I work in film more, there is complaints that there's a lack of skilled people, which in a way is good for people like me, because you will always have a job. Yeah, it's but to get to this stage, you have to have to learn things first. So it's yeah, I'm not sure what my advice would be.
No, well, it makes sense. Well, you're giving actually the right thing. You're saying the right thing, because every student is in a different place. They have different motivations. They have different goals. And so I think what you're saying basically is know exactly what you want, and also how you can learn the things if you break them down. So like you say, pressing is, you think like, oh yeah, I'm a tailor, I'm already pressing. But to actually learn pressing, you have to just spend perhaps a few months on it and just do pressing, because pressing is difficult. I'm a coat maker by training, but even sometimes I'm like, oh man, how am I going to press this? This is just like, I don't want to flip it inside out, and then, I don't want to do this, but now I have to do that. So it's not easy, especially when you're dealing with all these different segments.
Well, one of the businesses I came across, and I'm not sure they exist anymore. There were two businesses in Düsseldorf. When I did my apprenticeship, I had to bring couture garments to this there was a specialist dry cleaner, two specialist dry cleaners, and all the wealthy people would only go to these two dry cleaners.
Right.
So you could bring a ball gown in a bin liner, crumpled up and filthy from, street, I don't know, someone had been a drinking party, and, and you would pick it up and it would look like new.
Yeah.
And
Isn't
I
that
thought,
something?
how the hell do they do that?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Because I couldn't do it. I mean, I couldn't press something like that. And it is just a total miracle.
Yeah.
And there was someone in London as well, I think in South Kensington. There was a lady, an old lady, and she was semi-retired, but some of the designers used to go there, and she would know how to get any kind of mark out of a fabric. She had sort of potions for everything. And this is they said, well, we when I retire, then there's no one who will be able to do this because we can't find someone to train. Okay, so, and I think this is a problem, because all the young people now, from what I gather, is they want to become designers, but they don't actually want to. They actually don't want to make.
Very, very difficult. Well, I hope that with all the resources that are coming out in terms of craftsmanship, tailoring, etc., people are getting more interested in the whole spectrum. Let's say.
Yes. I mean, it is such a wonderful craft that we have, and it's so worth preserving. And
Mm-hmm.
Having this link to the past, keeping that going, even though there might be new technologies that come in and maybe taken over, but it's I think it's good to preserve the knowledge and skills that are out there, definitely.
Yeah, one of my theories is that, if we are lucky, we get to know our parents. If we're more lucky, we get to know our grandparents. If we are really lucky, we get to know our great-great-grandparents.
Yeah.
And beyond that, if you want to connect to yourself and your family and your ancestry, you only have the traditions and the crafts and the skills that remain and the stories. And so for us to learn, bringing it back to our conversation of why is everything old better, is because it connects us to a part of us that is just lost and gone.
I was very lucky. I was one of those very lucky ones in that I knew both my great-grandmothers, maternal and paternal.
Wow.
My great-grandmother, the maternal one, she was born 1889.
Okay.
And she died when I was 7 years old.
So it was your mother's grandmother. Wow.
No, my mother's father's mother.
Your mother's father's mother. Okay. Wow. Huh.
And my father's mother's father. Sorry, my mother's. Oh God, my father's mother's mother.
Your father's mother's mother. Wow.
Yeah, great-grandmother. Yeah. So she was born 1907. So I knew her. She died in the early 80s. And it's funny you mention ancestry as well, because I obviously I knew my grandparents then, and my grandmother, so my mother's mother, her family came from Alsace-Lorraine, which is now France, but it used to be part of Germany before the First World War.
Right.
And both her father and grandfather were tailors.
Mm.
And I actually have a photograph of her father, a very old, worn black and white photograph, him in his workshop.
Wow.
So it's wonderful to have that, and it's somehow, maybe it went down in the genes. I don't know.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I definitely believe that. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Huh. There you go. Okay. All right. Well, are you ready for a speed round? So I have a bunch of words, and if you can tell me in one word the first thing that comes up your mind, okay?
Okay.
Düsseldorf.
Family.
Ladies tailoring.
Couture.
Okay. Competition.
Effort.
Being self-taught.
Being self-taught. Achievement.
Regulation.
Restriction.
Standards.
Quality.
Wow. Apprenticeships.
Learning.
The essence of couture.
In one word?
Yes.
Quality.
All right.
I'm repeating myself, but that's the only word that comes to mind. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Savile Row.
Gents tailoring.
Most difficult thing in tailoring.
Cutting.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Phantom thread.
Okay. La Chasse.
Old world.
Tailoring books.
Tailoring books. My one.
That's a good one. Love it. And then last but not least, Thomas von Nordheim.
Tailor.
Tailor. All right. Well, Thomas, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to have this conversation for a long time. So thank you for enabling that.
Thank you, Reza. You're very welcome.
And that was Thomas. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. If you'd like to see more of Thomas or you'd like to get in touch with him, please follow the links in the description of this video to his Instagram, his website, and his masterclasses. If you have any thoughts, comments, suggestions, anything you'd like to share with us, please let us know in the comment section, and we hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.